Following her service as our First Lady, Rosalynn Carter has been continuing to work to improve the quality of life for people all over the world. She is an advocate for mental health, human rights, conflict resolution, and the empowerment of urban communities through her work at the Carter Center, a private, nonprofit institution in Atlanta founded by former President and Rosalynn Carter. How I wish I had the time to share their experiences as they campaigned together, succeeding in the election of Jimmy Carter to governor of Georgia. Then the family and Rosalynn Carter also joined in the campaign for Jimmy Carter as President of the United States. It has been stated by Vogue magazine that the Carters were the closest partnership ever to live in the White House. Rosalynn was unique in her success in breaking new ground as First Lady without uprooting the traditions of the past. She and her husband had developed a closely knit family with their 4 children and were also part of their large extended family. But as the President's wife, Rosalynn also had her own projects. The Older Americans Act, the Rural Clinics Act, and the Social Security reform demanded her concentration. But her main focus for 4 years was developing a strategy for helping the mentally ill. The Mental Health Systems Act was passed and funded by Congress, but the celebration was brief. Within a month, with a change of administration, much in the act was canceled, and the bulk of the funding they had achieved was no longer available. Her greatest disappointment, however, was the failure of the Equal Rights Amendment, but her efforts for women continued unabated. At her husband's request, she developed an up-to-date list of women who would be available for positions in the federal government. For example, until then, only 6 women had ever been appointed to the cabinet. President Carter appointed 3 of them. Only 5 had been appointed under secretaries of state. President Carter appointed 3 of them. By the end of his term, of the 46 women who were serving as federal judges, 41 had been appointed by President Carter. Surely, Rosalynn Carter was a major part of such victories for women. But what I best remember is from the First Lady of Plains, her autobiography, and I urge all of you to read this because it shows the kind of person we have here as a guest. She has a very candid, revealing description into the peacemaking process that went on at Camp David. There, she and her husband hosted Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel and President Anwar Sadat of Egypt. Read about it in Chapter 9. You'll hardly believe it. On TV, when I saw those 2 leaders shaking hands, I still get the shivers. I could hardly believe that this was happening and that the peace would hold. We thank you, Mrs. Carter, and your husband, Mr. Carter. In 1982, with Betty Bumpers, wife of United States Senator Dale Bumpers of Arkansas, Mrs. Carter launched Every Child by 2, a nationwide campaign initiated in 1991 to publicize the need for early childhood immunizations. And of course, all of you have heard about Habitat, particularly one of our board members who just went to China to check out locations for a Habitat project. As a child, Mrs. Carter helped her mother tend to her father and then her grandmother as they struggled with serious illness, so she was drawn to caregiving. Rosalynn Carter's mother, now in her 80s, is currently under Mrs. Carter's care. Today, Rosalynn Carter is one of the country's foremost experts on caregiving. She comes to the Ford Hall Forum to discuss her just published book titled Helping Yourself Help Others. What a model she's been. This is a book for caregivers. It's available for sale in the back corner of the meeting house at the end of the program. I almost said the service. The book examines the feelings of hopelessness, despair, and loss that caregivers face and provides ideas meeting the challenges confronting the caregivers. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mrs. Rosalynn Carter.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. And I just thought about all kinds of different things while she was talking. One thing that I was reminded of when she was talking about the Camp David Accords was on the last day when Jimmy and Prime Minister Begin and President Dodd came back to the White House, on the last day they were negotiating, I had to leave Camp David because we had a Sunday afternoon concert planned at the White House, and I had to come back and host that. And Jimmy had told me not to come back to Camp David, to call him first. So when I called, he said that they were coming in and they had an agreement. Well, I was standing with Mrs. Begin when the helicopter landed on the South Lawn and the three men came walking up. And Prime Minister Begin walked up and says, "Mama, we're going to go down in history for this." And I think everybody just broke up. It was so exciting. Well, I'm glad to be here today and happy to be able to talk about caregiving instead of politics, being a Democrat. And it was interesting last night to find myself in Boston on election night and to have everything going on at the Park Plaza, which was right across from the hotel, and I couldn't resist going over. And I've been out of it so long. And it was so much fun. And speaking of habitat, one of my really good friends is here today, who worked with us on the very first Habitat house I ever worked on, and that was Bob Massey. And I just think he's a wonderful person. But speaking of how long it's been since we were in the White House, since I was in politics, Amy Carter was 9 years old when we got to Washington. She just had her 27th birthday. If you can imagine, it's been that long since we're in the White House. Well, I have known caregiving firsthand. When I was 13, my father got sick with leukemia, and he was sick for probably 6 months before he died. I was the oldest of 4 children. My little sister was 4. I had 2 brothers in between. My mother was 34. And I know how a caregiving situation with somebody ill in the family or somebody that's there that you have to take care of all the time, I know how that affects the whole family. The next year, after my daddy died, 11 months later, my mother's mother died. She was an only child. And my granddaddy came to live with us and lived to be 95 years old. And I watched my mother. I was the oldest, and I was a daughter. And so she depended on me an awful lot. But I watched her go to work, support 4 children, and take care of her father at the same time. And I knew how hard it was for her. But she worked in the post office. She got a job in the post office. She went to work in the school lunchroom and then in a grocery store. But then she got a job in the post office while I was still in high school. And the postmaster let her have what we would call today flexible hours. He didn't do it so she could take care of Papa. He did it because he wanted somebody to open the post office before he got there in the morning. And then he wanted to leave earlier in the afternoon, so Mother had to be there. Her normal number of hours. So he let her go part-time in the middle of the day. But that worked so perfectly for her because she could go home and take care of Papa and fix his lunch, fix lunch for him. And also, she had a neighbor, we called her Aunt May, although she was not my aunt, who could look in on Papa after he got where he really needed care most of the time. She could look in on him and help Mother take care of him. Later, when Papa was bedridden, Aunt May, who was widowed too, would spend the night with my mother. So she would be there to help take care of Papa. Well, I knew how hard it was for my mother, but I had never realized the extent of the problem until I got involved with this issue a few years ago. Our local college, where I went to school in Americus, Georgia, which is our county seat 10 miles from Plains, has a small endowment for a mental health program. And I've worked on mental health issues since my husband was governor in the early 1970s. And so when I got home from the White House, they wanted to start a Rosalynn Carter Institute to work on mental health issues. Well, I already had a mental health program at the Carter Center in Atlanta, and I didn't want to duplicate that. And so when finally, after a while, when we didn't know what to work on, and the Georgia University system said we're going to set up the Rosalynn Carter Institute anyway, we decided to work with families of people who had mentally ill persons in the family, to work with caregivers for mentally ill people. In a small community where everybody knows everybody else, we knew people who were shut in, or who were taking care of mentally ill people. But also when other caregivers, those caring for people with physical handicaps or elderly citizens, heard about the program, they all wanted to come to the meetings. And so it quickly expanded to include caregivers across the spectrum of care, of need. And I realized that I'm a caregiver. We identify caregivers as those who care for somebody 24 hours a day or a few hours a day, or even someone like me. My mother will be 89 on Christmas Eve. She lives by herself. I have a brother in Plains who can take good care of her, but I'm the oldest, I'm the daughter. I was the one that helped her with my father and my grandfather. She depends on me, and I know she wants me at home, and I can't stay at home all the time, and so I feel guilty about it. I call her as often as I can. When I am at home, she eats lunch with me every day. If she's not feeling good, she'll come and stay with me at night sometimes. But she likes to be independent. She likes to be at home. But I still feel guilty because I'm not there to take care of her all the time. What I have learned is that all caregivers feel guilty. Even if they're with somebody 24 hours a day, they feel like maybe I'm not doing the best thing, or they get angry with the loved one they're caring for, and that makes them feel bad. What I have learned, and what I want caregivers to know, is that those are normal, natural feelings. It's all right to feel guilty. It's all right to get angry sometimes and frustrated sometimes. And there are so many people affected. In fact, one of my colleagues says there are 4 categories of people: those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, those who have been caregivers, and those who will need care. And that's about all of us. It's a real issue, a real issue, and there are lots of reasons for it. The societal changes. Women work. Neighborhoods are not like they were when my granddaddy was ill and Mother could call on a neighbor to come and stay with him. People are not in the neighborhood. Women are not in the neighborhoods anymore, and 80% of caregivers are women. And when men are caregivers, they'll mostly do it in a managerial role, to be sure somebody's there with the loved one, or to help take care of the finances. So most caregivers are women. Families are not as close as they used to be. They're going in all different directions. Deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill people put mentally ill citizens in the community before communities had facilities for them. So more of those are taken care of at home now than ever before. And a major cause is that we're living longer. At the turn of the century, the life expectancy was 45. Now it's about 75. So we're living longer. And medical technology has improved so that people survive serious traumas like heart attacks or accidents, strokes, and sometimes need care for the rest of their lives. And families are not having people are not having as many children, but still the majority of people that need care are cared for in the home. Only about 10 to 20% of those who need care are in institutions. And the need is going to get bigger and bigger. There are going to be more and more people needing care and fewer people who are able to give it. And the issue is now, though, beginning to receive some attention. You read stories about people in their 70s caring for parents in their 90s. Corporations are beginning to look at the issue too, because statistics show that 1 in 5 employees is caring for an elderly parent or a handicapped person in their home. And corporations are beginning to have sessions for employees on how to access the healthcare system, on insurance and living wills and those kinds of things. And also I read the other day about one employer who let 2 employees fill 1 full-time position so that each one of them could be off part of the time to take care of someone who was at home. 22% of the people in our country have had to give up a full-time job to take care of a loved one. And you know who those are. They're the women that had to give up their employment. Well, the first thing that the Rosalynn Carter Institute did was to do a survey. They did a survey to assess the needs in our community. And we took students who went with professional caregivers to call on family caregivers. And then the students went with the family caregivers to call on the professional caregivers. And what we learned, we thought was so valuable that that's when I decided to write a book that might possibly help other people who were giving care. We learned that caregiving is rewarding. People have a sense of esteem. We had one woman who said, "I can take better care of my mother than anybody." We have one who said, "My father wouldn't be alive today if I were not taking care of him." And most people do it because they want to care for the loved one, but the problem is overwhelming. And even those people who do it out of a sense of caring and not out of a sense of duty, a lot of people do it out of a sense of duty, but most people don't. It's still, even if it's rewarding for them, it is overwhelming at times. There are so many problems. They feel isolated and lonely, they can't get out, and they feel like, this is what we learned from the survey, and through my book I have the anecdotes from the survey to illustrate the problems. They feel that if friends drop by, they do it out of a sense of duty because they feel sorry for the person who's caregiving. And one woman said, "If my friends call or come by, they always say, 'How is your loved one doing? How's he or she getting along?' She said, 'They don't ever ask me how I'm getting along.'" I thought that was really touching. Caregivers are frustrated, lost in the maze of bureaucracy, shuffled from one agency to another. They don't know where to go. Caregiving can be a huge financial burden. Resources are exhausted sometimes very quickly. It can tax one financially, physically, and emotionally. We had some really poignant stories. One woman said, "I just want to run away. I just want to run away." And one woman did. She said she left her father in a wheelchair, totally helpless, just left him at home and went and checked in a motel, stayed for about 2 hours, felt so guilty that she went back home. And she said, "Of course, he was right there where I left him." Burnout is common. And burnout is that overwhelming feeling of exhaustion and just not knowing what to do next. One man who was taking care of his wife, his spouse who had Alzheimer's disease, said, "I cry a lot, but I don't let her see me." One woman said, my husband doesn't like for me to be frustrated. He doesn't want me to be upset because I have to take care of him all the time, so I don't let him see me when I get angry. There's so much stress and so much strain. Both of those people wanted to do what they were doing, and yet they were totally exhausted. And most caregivers don't prepare are not prepared for the situation they find themselves in. My daughter-in-law, Annette's father, just died. I think he was 75, and her mother was older than he. And he had been taking care of her for a long time. She's not ill, not physically ill. She was just older and depended on him to do things, all the things for them. He even went grocery shopping. He did a lot of things for her. And he died unexpectedly. He had not been sick. Her mother lives about a 4-hour drive south of Atlanta. Annette lived, and my son Jeff and Annette live close to Atlanta. Her mother now is in Arlington, Georgia. What is she going to do? She does not have the slightest idea of what she's going to do. Most people are thrust into the role with no preparation, and they need so much help. And one thing that we found in our survey was that caregivers don't take care of themselves. They're so often so absorbed in doing what they can for the one they're caring for that they don't take care of themselves. And that was the purpose of the title of my book, Helping Yourself, Help Others. Because if the caregiver doesn't take care of, I would say herself, mostly women, then the quality of care that she can give to the one who needs it is not what it should be. And that suffers. And so there are lots of things I would like to say to caregivers. Caregivers must have an outlet and not be totally absorbed in the one that they are caring for. It can be a hobby, even just to go out in the garden and work in the flower bed, or take some exercise. Walk around the block if you can get away long enough to walk around the block. Network with other caregivers. That is one thing that is so important, because so many caregivers feel that they're the only person in the world in that particular situation. And so many times they feel trapped in that situation. But what we have learned is that there are so many in the community. Since we started this program at home, people have just come. Everybody I see now says, I'm taking care of a mentally disturbed child, or I'm taking care of my mother, or my grandfather who's 94 came to live with us. Everybody I see almost has somebody that they either take care of all the time or feel responsible for. And so to network, find out what is available in the community and get together with people who are in the same situation can be so helpful. Rely on a sense of humor. It is so important to have a sense of humor. Since we've been home from the White House, all of Jimmy's family members have died. His father died in 1953, but since we've come home from the White House, his mother died, his 2 sisters have died, and his brother has died. All died with cancer. And Billy Carter's wife, Sybil, Billy was 50, was only 50 when he died. And Sybil, he was funny, told funny stories all the time, even until the last day that he died, the day before he died. And she decided to write down these funny things that he said. She's got this wonderful little book of things that Billy said to share with her children. They have 6 children. I know the day before he died, there was a young woman, a nurse at home, that used to come to his house and take care of him, and the day give him his shots and his medication and so forth. He said that he had to see her husband. So the husband came, and Billy said, just before I died, I just wanted you to know that your wife and I have been having an affair. One time when he was in the hospital and they had this tree there with all these tubes and all coming out of it, he said, looked just like a pine tree with kudzu growing all over it. I mean, he was just funny all the time. And even when we went in, when we go to see him, we were torn. And he always made us feel good. And so she has this wonderful, wonderful book of stories for her children. Take a break and don't feel guilty about it. That is so important. Appreciate your own efforts. These are things I'm saying to caregivers. Appreciate your own efforts, because so much of the time, caregivers on the verge of burnout will work so hard and feel like they accomplish so much less. And so you need to appreciate what you're doing. Let go a little bit. No one can do everything. That's another thing that caregivers feel that they just must every minute be trying to do for the one they're taking care of. And one person, when we asked what caregivers could do to one caregiver in our survey, she said, never forget yourself. Get dressed up once in a while. I thought that was a pretty good idea. I know when I'm around the house and working, in fact, I think that's good for anybody. When I'm around the house, when we get home, my desk is this high, and I sit there and work and work and work. And Jimmy Carter has taught me that you have to get away from it every once in a while. So about 4:30 in the afternoon when we're at home, we go jogging, or we play tennis, or we ride bikes, or do something to get out and to get away from what we're doing. It is so important for caregivers to do that. Well, in my book, I try to give the family caregiver ideas and suggestions to be helpful. I use my own experiences, I use anecdotes from the survey, but I also have collected information from others who have studied the issue and have really practical suggestions for those who are giving care. I have the last 50 pages, the appendices of 50 pages with all of the organizations, all of the self-help groups, hotlines that people can call. And what I have learned in this work, this study, is that the help that caregivers get oftentimes depends on whether or not they ask for it. But it's there and it's available, and I hope for people who read my book, it will make life a little bit easier, and hopefully it will make life enjoyable. Thank you.
I know it's customary for the speaker to sit at the table and be informal, but a number of people here may not be able to see Rosalynn Carter. So I've asked her to stand here by this microphone. And you know it is our custom to line up at the microphone there to ask questions. I want to keep her talking, as you do too. So please hurry with your questions, make them succinct, and let's keep her going because her time is very, very limited. Thank you. Who will be the first question? Okay.
Mrs. Carter, my name is Shuma Chakravarti. I bring greetings both from my native country of India, where you and your husband are greatly admired and remembered, and from the little Universalist Church in Orange, Massachusetts, which has many fans of you and your husband.
Thank you.
A brief request and a brief question. The senior citizens of Orange, Massachusetts have asked me to ask you how one becomes a member of your institute for human development. They'd like to contribute. They're too feeble to contribute time, but they'd like to contribute financially.
I don't think we have members. I hadn't thought about that. We have members of the Carter Center.
Okay, very good.
But what happens in the Institute has done wonderful things in our community, and what I would like to do is send them some of that information, if you will give me the address, because we have taken a 16-county area. It includes Columbus, Georgia, where Fort Benning is, which is our the largest city. America's, our county seat where the college is, has about 15 to 20,000 people, but it's a 16-county area with a lot of people. We have professional caregivers, family caregivers, we have representatives from all the government agencies, we have advocates, members of the representatives of the religious community, all meeting together in what we call a CareNet. It's a caregivers network, to decide what we can do to help caregivers in our area. And the first thing we decided on was the survey. Now we're giving courses in our area. We're going to very soon have those available for other people in the country on basic caregiving, how to take care of somebody and also take care of yourself, but also on the illnesses, the conditions like Alzheimer's or cancer and so forth, how because one of the main things that people wanted to know and said that was most important for them in our survey was education about the illness or the disease that their loved one had, because the relationship between the family caregiver and the professional is not always the best relationship. And they needed to know about the illness, and so we're having those classes. They get adult education credit for it, but we don't have them just at the college. We're spreading them out through the communities all in our area. Also, our local public library has set aside a niche for books and tapes and videos on caregiving and on the illnesses. There's just a lot of things going on. In these forums that we're having, we have noticed that men are coming, which is more men than we expected. Also, people are coming who think they might be caregivers. And as the issue is getting visibility, it's becoming okay to say I'm a caregiver, when in the past caregivers have been in second place because the one who needs care is the one who gets the attention. And so a lot is happening in our community, and I'd be happy to send that information to them.
Thank you. Mrs. Carter, thank you so much. One last quick request or question. The elderly people in Orange and even the younger people wondered if you might care to inscribe one book, and it'll inspire many people. It'll go into the library, including our shut-ins. Might I request you to sign one book?
Sure, I'll do that. I'm going to be signing some right after the program.
Wonderful.
I'll be happy to.
Thank you very much indeed.
Come right up.
Good afternoon, Madam First Lady.
Thank you.
As a former Navy man, I'd just like to say that I have the utmost respect for you and your husband for doing all these wonderful things for the homeless of this country, you know. And my questions, I have a two-part question. Is caregiving per se part of the President's health care program? And also, would you care to comment on the future of the health care program and the what do you think will happen to it in this next congressional session?
I wish I knew. I don't think caregiving was given enough attention in health care reform. In fact, I don't think it was discussed very much. And I think we could save a lot of money, because it's so much cheaper to take care of somebody in the home than it is in an institution. And also, the government will help pay for somebody to stay in an institution and when they don't at home. But being realistic, I don't think anything like that's going to happen, particularly now. And so I think what's going to have to happen is that the communities are going to do it, like our community. I think that what we're doing in our little area of Georgia is developing a model that can be replicated across the country, with the community actually coming together to do these things. What's happened also at home is that as we study these illnesses and have these open sesh forums for them, people who are who are taking care of others with these illnesses are coming together, and they're forming support groups, and they're meeting together even after the sessions are over. So I think if communities, if it becomes a real issue in the communities, then I think a lot of good things will happen that will help caregivers. I wish that health care reform could include something for caregivers, but I don't think it will. And as far as health care reform, we might have insurance reform. I think the window of opportunity for real reform in health care is gone. I'm sorry to say that, but that's how I feel.
I'm with a program in Boston called Project Healthy Plus. It's been in existence for about 15 years, and it brings speakers to elderly people in the Boston neighborhoods on wellness. I have personally decided that I'm not going to use the term illness anymore. I'm going to talk about wellness and what we can do to make that happen for everybody. We just began an exercise program for frail and isolated elderly, many of whom are in wheelchairs. And over a 3-month period, some of those people literally have gotten out of their wheelchairs and are able to move in this socialization kind of experience. I know you mentioned you don't know what's going to happen with healthcare reform, and I guess from what you have said, you're not as actively lobbying at this point for legislation. But I was at a meeting this morning at City Hall in Boston, and it's become clear that the little monies that existed for respite care, you know, money to pay somebody to go in even for a day, to allow the caregiver to be away, not to have to escape to the motel, but to legitimately be away, has been reduced somewhat dramatically. So I would urge you through your institute to look about ways that we can increase resources, however we do it.
Just a little bit of respite for a caregiver would go a long way.
Absolutely.
And I have not worked on that very much in healthcare reform because I've been working so hard to get mental health care and healthcare reform. And I have a mental health program at the Carter Center. I have an annual symposium. We just had our 10th annual symposium, and I started bringing together the heads of the various mental health organizations, and these people have never worked before, worked together before, because funds for mental health programs have always been so short that each group had to just grasp for what they could get. Well, I started bringing them together 10 years ago, and a few would come for not this year, because this year healthcare reform is over. We're working on healthcare, but for 2 years before, we have had about 60 mental health organizations represented. And we thought that if we all came together and decided on something that should be in healthcare reform, we would have a lot better chance of getting it than if everybody worked on their own thing, that little phrase that they wanted in, a bill that they wanted. And we actually had 35 or 40 agree on principles. The mental health community is united as has never been before, and although healthcare reform did not come about, I think the mental health community was a winner, because the question when we started was whether or not mental illness would be covered. I don't think that's the question anymore. Mental health issues became part of the national debate as they have never become before. I think the question now is how much mental illnesses will be covered. So I think we have made a step forward, but you're right, we need to lobby for just a little bit of respite care, because I know we can't get what we want.
What is so wonderful is how you have brought, I think, to the attention of the public the fact that mental health has an impact on physical health.
That's right.
And so many of the elderly physical problems, I think, are directly related to the mental health issues.
Well, if we had what I would like to have, we would have no distinction whatsoever. If somebody is sick and suffering, they should be able to get care. And it doesn't matter whether they're mentally ill or physically ill, they're still sick and they're still suffering, and they should be covered with in healthcare reform.
Thank you for all that you do.
Mrs. Carter, as I listened to your address today, I was struck by a possibility. I wonder if it's feasible. I wonder if, since President Reagan has announced that he is going to be suffering Alzheimer's disease, whether it might not be symbolically very important to kind of break political deadlock, if you will, to find the Carter family and the Reagan family conjoining somehow in the mission that you've undertaken here. It might create a wonderful synergy. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, I'm not sure, but my heart goes out to them. And I've worked with a lot of caregivers who care for people with Alzheimer's in this program that I'm involved in. And it's a devastating disease. It's devastating to the family. And my heart goes out to Nancy. I think that they said that President Reagan in his statement said that one of the things that he worried about was the effect that it would have on her and what she would have to do. And also, several people have asked me if I was going to send her one of my books, and I think I will. I guess I think it would help her, because it gives some thoughts about and ideas about things that can be done. But it would be a good idea to work together. Thank you.
Your talk was very impressive. My name is Jim Tipton. I live in Cambridge, but I grew up in Sylvester, Georgia, a few miles south of Plains. I learned somehow or other that politics was essential for a citizen, a good citizen.
Essential for?
A good citizen. Is this not working?
Yes, yes, I understand.
I'd like to ask you if you would be willing. Many of us have just gone through an experience of feeling lost in a very, I would call it a nasty campaign in many respects, in which many of the people who have won, in my judgment at least, are not people who are very sympathetic for government use in helping people who need help, the poor, many others. And I'm just wondering, in addition to the people who, like myself, feel lost, we have millions of people who won't even take the trouble to vote.
That's right.
I'm wondering if you would be willing to tell us about how we might work, not just for the mental ill or others, the Reagans, the Habitat, the housing, but in general, to use government, local, state, federal, to give help to people who need help, which is, in my estimation, one of the essential needs of government, if we can only get it to do so.
Well, I think one of the responsibilities of government is to take care of those people who can't take care of themselves.
Exactly.
I don't know what's going to happen now, because I think President Clinton's going to have a very difficult time trying to do the things he wants to do. I don't think he's going to be able to. I don't know whether there's going to be cooperation between the parties or whether there's going to be gridlock. Right now, the Republicans are saying we have to work together. I think that probably lasts a few months. I hope I'm wrong. But one of the things that I think is going to have to be done, because I don't think government's going to help solve the problems of the poor and needy. I think that the people who have gone into office now think that there's too much government, the government should get out, people should take care of themselves. We have a program in Atlanta that even Newt Gingrich likes, if you can believe it. And Newt Gingrich was a professor in a college at home when Jimmy was governor, and he had a letter to the editor every day in the paper blasting Jimmy Carter, so we have dealt with him ever since the early 1970s. We call it the Atlanta Project, TAP, the Atlanta Project.
I contributed to it once.
Oh, really? Well, thank you very much. But what we did was identify the poverty area of Atlanta, and we used two criteria: the most pregnant teenage young women and the most single-parent families. And it took in an area of 500,000 people in Atlanta. There were 20 high schools in that area, so we divided into 20 clusters. Everything that feeds into high school is a cluster, so that it would be manageable. And Jimmy we had a board of advisors, and he made every advisor responsible for a cluster. I was an advisor, so I have a cluster. I spent at least a year and a half in that cluster, meeting with everybody. And my cluster happened to have a very affluent section, and the reason that it was part of that Atlanta project was because the southern part of that area, the people that were poor went to that high school, and so that happened to make up a cluster. So I was fortunate I had an affluent section. But what the main purpose of this, of working this way, is because Jimmy says that those who are fortunate and have funds and are wealthy, and we call ourselves wealthy if we have shelter, food, good health, and so forth, should feel some responsibility to those who don't have things. And we're trying to get the two Atlantas, he said, working together. And I have really been able to do that in my cluster. But we go in and we really pattern this a little bit after Habitat for Humanity, from what we learned from that experience, because Habitat is not a giveaway program. People have to work on their house and then they have to pay for it. So we go into the clusters and we say, you tell us your problems and we'll help you solve them. But what has happened is people have volunteered from the greater Atlanta community. We now have a corporate sponsor, a corporate partner, we call them. They don't just give them a lot of things, but what they have done in almost every cluster, I think in every one, is a manager in that cluster to help the cluster coordinator. We only hired 2 people, cluster coordinator and an assistant. but a corporation will give a manager that can help them in the community. Every university, every cluster has a university partner. And what we've done is identify the problems, which we already, I thought I knew something about the problems until I actually got in those clusters. It's unbelievable what goes on. But we've gotten together, everybody, for instance, who's working on literacy, everybody who's working on teenage pregnancy. There's so many good things going on in the poverty area of every city. And if we can get these people working together, then we can do so much more to help people who need help. But also, I met with the people in my cluster. At first, the only people who come are the activists who've been trying to do good things anyway. Finally get the citizens to come, the ones who need help. But then you have to keep meeting with them because they've never had any kind of leadership position. They've never had to be responsible for anything. And so when you say, okay, what do you want to work on? Health, educational, criminal justice, housing, and so forth. They don't have the slightest idea what they want to work on because they've never had the opportunity. But finally, you will get people to say, I'll work on education and so forth. And then you get those groups together meeting. And I could not get anybody to work on criminal justice in my cluster, none of the residents. And one night, because in the first place, they don't think there's any justice in the criminal justice system. The policemen, they think, are not on their side. And they've all had bad experiences with the law enforcement agencies. But one night I said, okay, who wants to work on safe streets? And I had all kinds of volunteers. So now I've got great groups that are doing neighborhood watches, and we've even got a police station in one of our housing projects. We've gotten the policemen to let the members of the housing project call and report on somebody doing drugs without giving their name, so that the person that they've told on can't get back at them, because they will do that. Do you know that one day I went into this in my cluster, and there's a little boy, he must have been 9 or 10 years old, had on a new jogging suit and a new pink and green bicycle. And I said, gee, you must have a lot of money. And where do you get all of this money? And he said, well, all I have to do is when I see the cops coming, I put my bicycle right over there. A drug pusher was using him to let them know. And he said, when my friend sees there were 12 or 13 law enforcement agencies. He knew which ones he was to look for. His friend knew which one he was to look for, so that the drug pushers could hide. Now, he was 9 or 10 years old. I mean, it's incredible what goes on. But we're working through those and trying to get the people who have the problems to solve them. This is the problem that Newt Gingrich likes. And he has come down several times. One thing that we've been able to do, and a lot of it, I think, cutting through the bureaucracy of government can be a big portion of this. For instance, people who need help from welfare or health or any kind of health program, or WIC, Women and Infant Children and so forth, everybody has to fill out a form at home for welfare. Well, in North Carolina, I think the form for welfare is 44 pages. I think it's the longest in the nation. Ours was 20-something. We have gotten all of these forms that were 68 pages cut down to 8 pages. And a poor person only has to fill it out one time. And then electronically, all the agencies are coordinated, so that then when that person goes to the next agency, their form is already there, already filled out. What poor person, so many are illiterate, what poor person can fill out a 44-page form? I can't even do one. When I have to say, what do I do with this? And they have to have somebody help them. And so this was one of Al Gore's better government things. We actually got it done. In fact, we called, when we were working on this, we called all kind of people together. And Jimmy said, let's have the government agent, the heads of the government agencies come. So we called Health and Human Services and Transportation and Housing and so forth. We invited 15 people, and they all came. And it was an emotional session. What we don't remember is that these people spend their lives trying to do good for people, the government agencies do, and they are just as restricted as we are trying to do something, because funds are so short, they can't do what they want to do, they only work on one little thing. And it was emotional. These people had tears in their eyes when they talked about what they could do if they worked together. And so 2 days later, this man who's the head of the federal officials organization called Jimmy in. He said, "Mr. President, do you know how many federal agencies there are in Atlanta?" 110. 110 federal agencies. We have the regional also. And so they all came to the Carter Center. And that's how we got this form reduced, with federal agents working with city and county and state agencies, all working together to come up with one form. There is so much of that we can do, and I think the Republicans will support that.
Let me give one more anecdote related to just what you got through saying. A demographer in Washington named Harold Hodgkinson gave a speech at Harvard a year ago, in which he said he had been at a meeting of social workers. And one of them told him, you know, poor people on welfare have to deal with, as you said, 14 or 15 different agencies, each one having had no talk with the other. One of the poor people on the welfare for this particular social worker says, you know, you got to be damn smart to be poor.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mrs. Carter. I'm a little bit taller than the other folks. My family loves you.
Thank you.
And you and your family. I wanted to open with that. I have an 83-year-old mother who got her last speeding ticket when she was 78. And a 98-year-old father who got a little annoyed with her one day and left her when he was 97. He's right now on his knee asking her to let him come back. So they're doing very well. But my concern is about the homeowners here in this state and across the country. I am sure you're familiar with the mortgage scam that took place in Atlanta. The same thing is going on here in Boston, and excuse this voice. 4 out of 5 minority home buyers and homeowners get scammed. The numbers increase when we go into the elderly. I'm an organization, my name is Suzanne Myers, and I'm the executive director of Rise Incorporated. My oldest scam victim who is willing to fight is 77, a Caucasian woman that lives on the Cape that took her husband's insurance money from when he died and bought a home that they had rented for 15 or 20 years, only to be scammed by the bank and the developer, and is facing eviction. With your prominence and your husband's prominence, is there any way that we can network together? Because 40% of the mortgage scam victims end up in mental institutions.
Why don't you write me a letter?
Okay, could I have an address, and could I?
Plains, Georgia.
Okay.
I get it. Or either Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question. Thanks, Suzanne.
Sure.
I'll be very short.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for bringing mental illness into the national agenda. I'm employed at a place called McLean Hospital. You came and spoke in 1978. And so I'm bringing it on behalf of everyone that I work with and everyone else who works with the mentally ill population. I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I was going to ask you to say thank you to Mrs. Carter, but we'll do it again. Anyhow, please extend your greetings to Mr. Carter for us. Tell him he missed a great speech. And will all of you, and I recognize a number of you in the audience, and I know that you're busy in key organizations all over this city, so let's see if some of us can get together and follow through as Mrs. Carter suggested. I don't know quite how to do it, but I know that University of Massachusetts Boston has a special program for the elderly, and maybe they'll be able to help us in this, and we'll develop a coordinated program which I know is needed. Also, when we get discouraged, remember that only 10 or 15 years ago, support groups were unknown. This is one of the tiny little glimmers for optimism today. And they're very, very significant, as Mrs. Carter pointed out. More and more help is coming to the fore, but we don't have it organized into lobbying, into financial resources, into outreach. Mrs. Carter will be signing copies of her book now, and when you form the line, come down this one just in front of the camera because we want to leave the exit door open. Join us for the last Ford Hall Forum event of the season, Thursday, November 17th, when Attorney General Janet Reno joins us at Blackman Auditorium at Northeastern University. And remember, what did the people do when their elderly parents died and they built this meeting house? Just think of how we've improved life expectancy, but it comes with responsibilities. The program for Another Outstanding Woman begins 7 o'clock. Thank you all for coming, and thank you.